All right. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to our another one of our WiSciFiles chats. I'm Shireen Stanford. I'm the Senior Producer Director at WPSU and the producer for WiSciFiles. With me is Erica Smithwick, who is Associate Professor of Geography here at Penn State. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you.
So this is our last chat, and it's actually pretty fitting that it would be Erica who is our final chat because Erica was one of the people who actually helped inspire me to do this series. So I'm happy to have you on this chat. Also on this chat, though, are some special guests. We have the fifth graders at Park Forest Elementary School in State College. We also have the seventh graders from Armstrong Middle School in Bristol Township. And I'm sure we have other people on the chat. Please feel free to type in and let us know that you're here so that we can acknowledge you. I know we have a lot of questions, and so I'm actually going to get started, Erica, by asking you one thing. The video that we put together showed a lot of your work in South Africa and here on campus just because that's where we happened to go to South Africa together. But I know that you do a lot of other work. Can you talk about some of your other interests outside of kind of biodiversity and those kinds of things and forests?
Sure.
Just give us a little bit about some of the things that you're studying.
So one of the central things that I'm interested in is fire and wildfire. So I've been working in Yellowstone National Park for more than a decade trying to understand how wildfires shape ecosystems and how they determine whether the forest is going to come back or not. And so I've been working out there for a while. I also have projects in Wisconsin where we're looking at forest management there. I'm working with the Menominee Native American tribe and trying to understand how they can better manage for forests under climate change. And where else? I also worked in Ghana looking at human health issues. So looking at how land use disturbance and climate change can influence human health patterns.
Right, so a lot more than you saw in the video. And I definitely wanted to make sure that you brought up fire because I know that is a big part of the work that you do.
Yep.
So we have our first question from Kaylee at Park Forest Elementary. And her question is, when did you first become interested in science and when did you decide you wanted to be a scientist?
Hi, Kaylee. Great question. I knew that I was interested in science probably around 10th grade. I had an environmental science class and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and more interesting than some of my other classes. But I wasn't sure what to do with it. A very strong memory for me is when I was thinking about going to college and thinking about what I wanted to major in. I was like, well, I could do something in science, or I could work for an NGO, which is a non-governmental organization that makes decisions, or I could work in policy and government. But I said, you know what? I really want to understand the system that I'm trying to manage, and that choice made me decide to go more in the science route than the applied kind of route I could have taken. And then when I was in college, I went to Tufts University in Boston. I actually found it a really great place to focus on science because I had to double major. I specifically chose Tufts because it was an environmental studies program that made you double major in a science of any choice. So it wasn't just one of these, what I was thinking at the time, a fluffy environmental science program. I had a broad-based environmental studies program and then was able to major in a science that I thought was most relevant to me, and for me that was geology. So that's how I sort of started the path, I think.
Great. Angie at Park Forest wants to know, what do you teach as a professor, and do you teach your students what you study?
Hi, Angie. Good question, too. I study, or I teach, I should say. Maybe that answers the second part of your question. I teach a landscape ecology class, and that's an upper level undergraduate class. You might ask, what's landscape ecology? That is the study of ecology, of living systems, but in the context of a larger area, usually. So we're thinking about how land use might affect ecosystem processes. And landscape ecology is really interested in how patterns of systems influence those processes. So whether a farm is next to a stream, for example, or whether the farm is really far away from the stream, might determine how much pollution gets in that stream. And so we start to study questions from that angle. So that's my higher level undergraduate class, and that is one that's probably pretty closely tied to my research. And then at the more introductory level, I teach a parks class. It's called Global Parks and Sustainability. And that one is a general education course. Any major can take it. And we look at case studies of park conservation all over the world. And so there's lots of elements of that course that are not directly related to what I study. I don't publish papers on it so much, but it very much is a course that frames my perspective. So I really enjoy teaching it.
Darian at Armstrong Middle School wants to know, is doing your job hard? And what are the hardest parts?
How much time do you have? So yeah, my job is hard, but when I think about it that way, I think, well, a lot of jobs are hard. I mean, if you're working on a factory line, that's hard. If you're working as a secretary, that's hard. If you're working as an astronaut, that's hard. Like, all of these things could be framed as being hard. So I try not to choose, I choose not to think of it that way. I do think there are parts of my job that are more challenging than others. A lot of the balance in my life, because I don't just do research, I don't just do teaching. I also have to do service to the university and to my professional community. So I'm constantly juggling things, and that can be stressful at times. But if you kind of come to peace with that and realize that you can't do everything all at once, but you can do things over time, then it's not hard, it can be more fun.
This is kind of a follow-up to that, but Sam C. at Park Forest wants to know, how does your job involve geography? Which part of what you do involves geography?
Yeah, good question too. So I didn't start off as a geographer, Sam. I actually started off first as a geologist, then I moved to a forestry program, then I moved to another forestry program, but kind of doing the landscape ecology bit, and then I moved to a zoology department doing landscape ecology, and then I got a job in a geography department. So you can call me a geographer, and that's fine. I have embraced it over the past 10 years. But just so you know that path can kind of be circuitous. And the department where I'm working, I could be working in an ecology department or a biology department. I just happen to be working in geography. For me, that's really good, and I think it has shaped my research over the past 10 years because I'm interacting with social scientists more. Geography is a very diverse discipline, and it has people in physical geography where I am, as well as social science. And so I think that's incredibly important, and that the timeliness of being in a geography department is incredibly important because a lot of times we're asking questions about sustainability, right? How can we be more sustainable in our lives, in our societies? And I think the only way to do that is when you couple an understanding of the natural system with an understanding of how we're managing that system. And so that coupling is really present in a geography program, and thus is really present in a lot of the work that I do.
And I know when we talked, you also talked about just the social sciences being important in terms of working with people, because there is no studying the environment without understanding how people interact with the environment and all of those things. So that's another
I mean, thing. I wish that I could just be in a vacuum and study plants, because I love plants, or I love animals. And that work is really important and is critical. There's so much we don't know about the natural world. But at a time in society where there's so many pressures on those systems, it's sort of important that you engage with people that are making decisions about those systems and understanding what people value in them. And so that means implicitly you have to talk to people and you have to engage with the science around that.
Right. So Dida at Park Forest wants to know, what kinds of tests, experiments do you conduct?
Good question, Dida. Through these various projects that I've been talking about, I do a number of different approaches in my science. Would this be a good time for me to show my props?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Because we do have another question that I can see about what were you doing in the video.
Okay. So one of the first things I do is observational work. And what you saw in the video there was me looking at changes over time in a forest system. And to do that, there's no real control to an experiment. If you know, like there's a control and then an experiment, the control doesn't have the actual process, and then you test for that process with the experiment. In observational work, you're just going out there and seeing how things change over time, and you're learning from the system. It can lead to other more experimental approaches down the road. But for that work, we actually, this is a very simple instrument called it's a measuring a diameter at breast height measuring tape, and it's called that because you're supposed to measure at chest level the girth of a tree, and you basically just wrap this around the tree, and that's what I was doing in the video to see how big the tree is. And that seems kind of silly, but that's the point. It's pretty easy to do, and you can do it quickly. And so you can measure every tree, and you can see how big every tree is. And we have equations that will allow you to extrapolate the diameter of that tree to the biomass of the entire tree. So instead of cutting down the tree and weighing it, which is what people do to develop the equations, we don't want to do that in the real world, right? We want to actually keep the tree there. So we developed this way to sample. And so if you do it in a defined area where you can have just a bigger measuring tape, and you can lay out a plot. And in our case, we do 40 meter by 40 meter plots, and then we measure every tree. So just two measuring tapes is all that we're doing there. That's the simplest kind of science that I do. It does get more complicated when you're trying to do tree identification. So you have to identify what tree you're looking at, so you understand what equation to apply. But that it's pretty simple. The more complicated work that I do is actually related to soils and soil ecology. So I'm really interested in how those trees grow. And they're growing in soil, and that soil has a certain amount of nutrients and a certain amount of water. And if you want to know how much nutrients or how much water and how that's changing, what I do is I go in and I actually take what's called a soil core. And this is just a PVC pipe from Home Depot. You can get fancier about it, but when we're working in remote areas, this works just fine. And you basically just pound it into the ground, and you get a certain volume of soil in there. And I plop it into a fancy Ziploc bag. That's called science on the cheap, folks. And you put it in there. Then you have a known volume of soil and it has to be Ziploc. This is why I brought the Ziploc bag, because there's no other plastic bags that are better than Ziploc. I'm serious about this. Next time your mom puts a sandwich in Ziploc, tell her how important this is for scientific purposes. But anyway, we take that back to the lab, and it preserves the moisture in the soil, it preserves the nutrients, and then we do take it into the lab and we do some chemistry on that soil. And that's when it gets a little trickier, and I can talk to you about that later. But we have certain instruments that measure the nutrients and the moisture and the pH of the soil.
Yeah, when we were in South Africa with you, that was one of the things that I noticed that some of the students were doing who were there was, doing soil sampling and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Mia from Armstrong Middle School wants to know what inspired you to do this particular job? Because like you said, you could be doing other things. What about being in academia made you want to do this job?
So, Mia, the thing is that when you set out as this being your undergraduate major, you don't know what your job's going to be at the end of 4 years. And then you say, well, maybe I'll go do some more grad school. And you just keep going along, making these choices, and all of a sudden you find yourself in academia. And I don't mean to belittle the process. It's actually a hard process, and you do have to want it. But I didn't know that I would end up this way. Like, a lot of things had to go right. I had to have a good support network around me. I had to have some mentors around me. I had to like the work, which I happen to like. But I think the key for me was actually by doing all that, by moving around to where I went from my undergraduate degree to 2 different graduate degrees. I went from Massachusetts to Montana for my master's. And in my master's, I actually traveled to Africa to do field work. And that was my first exposure to both fire science and to Africa. And then I went on to Oregon, to the Pacific Northwest to do my PhD, and then to Wisconsin and to Madison. But my field work was in Yellowstone, and then to Pennsylvania. So I kind of moved around a lot. And that's hard in some ways, but it kept it fun. And I kept learning about a new system. And I said, I can do this job, I'm good at it, but I also really enjoy this process of discovery. And so I just kept with it, and through over time and inertia, and maybe a little good luck here and there, it worked out.
Yeah, you had a very, literally a journey around, and then also in, I think, your studies and your work. Right. So we have a combined question. Sam C. and Brandon at Park Forest want to know, which wicked problem is your favorite to work on? And, any wicked problems that you've worked on are the most or least dangerous?
Okay, that's a good one. They're all fun, and they're all interesting. And what sort of, well, okay, I'll answer your question. This is Sam and Brandon, yeah? I think the most wicked problem we have right now is climate change. I really think that this is impacting all of our ecosystems in very profound ways, not all of which are observable now. And our modeling tells us, so that's the other kind of work I do. I do computer modeling, which is really simple and not too fancy, but we can forecast how ecosystems change in the future. And when we run those scenarios, there's some pretty alarming outcomes about the fate of biodiversity and a lot of other ecological processes that we might be interested in. So unfortunately, it's a wicked problem because it's societal as well. You have these forces in society that are exacerbating or not the effects of climate change. And then you have, I mean, what that is CO2 and methane in the atmosphere, but then there's all sorts of cascading, interacting effects from that CO2 and the warming and the precipitation and the changes in snow that could affect particular ecosystems in different ways in different places. So it becomes really complex, really hard, which is why it's hard to talk about in a simple way. It doesn't fit on sound bites very well.
Yeah, and it's something that people are talking about a lot right now.
Yeah.
Actually, Nivea at Armstrong Middle School had kind of a follow-up question, which is what impact does climate change have on the animals in the ecosystems that you've studied? I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of see some of that.
Right. Hi, Nivea. So one of the ways that climate change is affecting ecosystems in places that I've worked directly is through disturbances, is through enhanced fire activity, for example. So if you have a system in which fire becomes more and more common or more and more severe, the ecosystems and the animals are not going to be able to adapt to those disturbances. They just are going to keep coming faster and faster and faster. And so we're starting to see fire regimes change pretty dramatically. And that's especially true in the West, but we're actually seeing that impact here in the East too a little bit. And it's possible that we could have a wildfire in the East. There was a big wildfire in Acadia, not only about 100 years ago, and that's up in Maine, right? And you don't think of Maine having wildfires, but it can. And so managers in this area are actually trying to appropriately add fire back into the landscape, but they're doing it to create habitat for animals that depend on it. It's probably a whole other story, but but anyway, whether there's too much fire or too little fire is very much affecting animals, and that has to do a lot with climate change. That would be one answer. I think most of the direct impacts on climate change are happening right now in coral reef systems and in Arctic systems. And I don't study those systems directly, but a lot of the science of my colleagues is related to those changes, because those are the ones that are happening right now.
So we have another combined question, and Kaylee, Aaron, and Autumn at Park Forest want to know, how often do you go to South Africa, and how long are you usually there? And actually, we have another question from Jocelyn at Park Forest that kind of ties into that says, how often do you get to see your family? So I think maybe from the video it seemed like, you're there a lot, but it's more like, so how often do you go to South Africa, and, how much time do you spend apart sometimes?
So, this project here that you saw in the video was a simple project because I couldn't stay away from my family for long, nor did I want to. So the most I was ever away at one period of time was 3 weeks, 3.5 if you count travel, which is long enough. And when my kids were little, that was really, really hard. So I wouldn't ever go for longer than that unless I was bringing my kids, and that's where this Fulbright experience that I had last spring was really great, because I was able to bring them all with me so that we could experience it together. But even that, like 3.5 weeks, is pretty long for me. Usually I would sort of go for shorter periods of time. And usually it's once a year. I would go over once a year, do some field work, and come back home. You can go for longer, and you can certainly do more work, and probably if I didn't have a family, I would do that. But that's one of those trade-offs I've made, is that I'm not going to leave my family for long periods of time.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of balance you were talking about in the video, and choices that you kind of have to make.
Yep.
Tasha at Park Forest wants to know, what do you enjoy most about your job?
So what I enjoy most about my job, Tasha, is that I get to go to these places. So as much as it is hard to do that travel on the family front, it's also pretty amazing that I can create these opportunities to bring my family sometimes. But also personally, just to explore these different systems and see a part of the world, and realize that that's my job, is to understand how these systems work. is pretty awesome. And I travel for conferences too. I travel for meetings, to meet colleagues, to give talks, and it's fun. It's really adventuresome to do that, as long as you keep it in check. There's certainly a case of too much travel. But I guess the other thing I'll mention is that I do like being in academia because of the blend of research, teaching, and service. So I'm constantly doing something new every day. Like I was thinking about that today, coming to do this, is that it's really fun that I get a chance to talk with you about what I do. And what a great platform to be able to do that. And tomorrow I'll be doing something totally different. I'll be working on different projects. So every day is a new adventure, and I have to keep close tabs on my calendar because I don't what am I doing tomorrow? And that flexibility is also really, really fantastic because it allows me to juggle the work-life balance on a daily basis, which for me has been really important.
Yeah. Because that flexibility, I think, is important too.
Right.
That's in academia.
Mm-hmm.
So you touched on this a little bit, but Gabe at Park Forest wants to know: Do you do research only in South Africa or in other places? So you mentioned Yellowstone.
Yeah.
What are some other places that you typically do research?
So Gabe, I do research. It depends on where the funding comes from, frankly. So the process is that I have to submit and write a grant, 15 pages, single-spaced. That's just the text, and then you have all this other documentation about budgets and personnel and all that. But the science is in 15 pages, single-spaced. I have to propose to a government agency what I would like to study and why it's important. And if they select that for funding, and acceptance rates are like 10 to 15%, then you go and do the work. So I propose a lot more work than actually gets funded. And a lot of that money goes towards supporting graduate students or supporting the travel, supporting the science, the materials and such. So where I've been successful and where I've gotten to do the work is recently in Ghana, where I was doing that human health project, working out in Yellowstone, doing fire there. And then I currently have two projects, one in the east, working with prescribed fire managers and prescribed fire in the eastern United States, and then another in Wisconsin working with the Menominee Nation on sustainable forestry. So I would say most of my work is in forests, but it's in forests in different parts of the world.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the grant writing because that is a big part of being in academia. I mean, it's sort of like, and I've heard other scientists say, I think someone told me, 75% of the stuff that she submits is rejected. And that's something important for you guys to realize too,
really
is you have to be, you got to get used to rejection
Yep.
and perseverance, I think, because, one person might say no, but the next organization might say yes. So, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I see a question a little bit lower down that is from Liam at Park Forest that says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like what you do? Because it's kind of related.
Might depend on the day.
Right.
Right now it's 10. It's hard. I'm hard pressed to think of something else that would make me as fulfilled. So I'm going to rank it pretty high. I'm going to rank it at least 8 or 9. And the only reason I don't go up to 10 is because of those moments of stress and rejection that do come. And I wish I had all the support and all the capacity to do what I want to do, and it's just always a struggle to get there. But I don't see any less struggle if you worked in a government agency on that topic, or you worked in these non-governmental organizations on that topic. You're always going to be struggling against something. So I feel pretty happy to be at Penn State because they support a lot of resources, and they give you some of that leg up that you might need to get a new project going, or find collaborators. And so that really helps it helps me keep going, even if you don't get that big grant or something.
But Erica gets a lot of them. So
Right.
Brian J. at Armstrong Middle School wants to know, do you work with any lawmakers around climate change or animal protection as a result of your research? And I
Yeah.
guess you could put fire into that too, because I do
Right.
know that sometimes you do that. So do you work with any lawmakers?
So that's a great question, Brian. And so I would say I don't directly work with lawyers, but a lot of my work is very relevant to policy. So I think a lot about fire policy and how to manage fire. So for example, I don't know if you know, but in Pennsylvania, there was not an effort to do prescribed fire burning in Pennsylvania because there just wasn't the right regulations enforced. So there's a lot of risk for people to actually do a management fire for any reason. And once that was relaxed, people were able to go in and do fire. So a lot of the work and the questions that I ask are very dependent on what policies are out there. We know, for example, that one size does not fit all for fire policy in the U.S. In Yellowstone, it's a very climate-driven fire regime, but in Arizona, it's driven from past fuel or fire suppression and Smokey the Bear, and now there's all these fuels up there that are ready to burn, sort of independent of what's going to happen with the climate. So there's these different factors that are going on in different regions, and so that's very relevant to policy. With regard to climate change, a lot of work that I do touches on that. There are organizations like the Natural Resources Defense Council and other groups that actually have lawyers and have a whole armada of folks that are trying to really attack the policy side of what we do. But I am focused more on the science.
And do you ever work with politicians or things like that, kind of?
Yeah, well, I did go to, this is a long time ago now, but I did go to D.C. to work with a bill. Essentially, it was part of a lobbying effort, I guess you'd call it, to try to tell people why having dead wood in the forest was a good thing, and that salvage logging after a fire might not always be the best thing for that system. But I was brought in as a scientist. And actually, the next couple weeks, I'm going down to the National Academies, and I'm going to talk about fire policy in D.C. With other scientists, but also other policy makers will be there. So, and then a lot of my writing, I'm doing more outreach writing right now, talking to the press. I would say that's probably the main route by which I end up influencing policy is through outreach activities.
Camilla at Park Forest wants to know, if you couldn't have your current job, what else would you do?
I have thought about this before, mainly because my brother-in-law asks these kinds of questions all the time, like on long car rides. So I think my answer is actually going to be international policy or international development kind of issues, international relations. I think that comes partly from my time at Tufts University, which has a Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And I took one of the best courses there I've ever taken about the Middle East and Middle East policy. And it's influenced the way I listen to the news every day. And also because my work takes me to all these other places and all these other countries, and I realize my science is happening in the context of all these much larger policy dimensions. So I've always found that to be really, really interesting, and I would love to do that. Totally different.
Dante at Park Forest wants to know, do you have hobbies besides running?
All I do is run. I run every day, all the time. Yes, Dante, I do. I love to read. I don't have too much time to do that, but I did just join a book club with some friends recently, so I'm trying to be better. And then I also love movies. I really, really love movies. My brother is actually an actor and is teaching acting out in LA. And I actually grew up doing musicals and having a lot of sort of stage presence doing some musicals. I don't sing very well, but it was fun to get up there anyway. And so I love movies. I'm kind of a geek when it comes to watching movies and staying up with the Oscar runs and all of that stuff. So,
you know, we've talked a lot of times, and I did not know anything about the musicals, because for sure we would have figured out a way to.
I was listening to Hamilton on the way over here, so.
Awesome. Gabby at Park Forest has a quick question, which is, how long have you been at Penn State?
So I've been here since 2007, so I guess this is my 10th year.
Wow, that's a good run.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good
run. Tyler at Park Forest wants to know, where was your most favorite place to work outside of Pennsylvania? That's probably tough, right?
Yeah. I guess, Tyler, I have to say South Africa, just because it is so beautiful. It's kind of like Southern California, very Mediterranean climate, very dry, beautiful blue skies, really interesting ecosystems, tons of biodiversity, beautiful flowers all the time. But also because it's a really complex place socially. You know, it's just culturally really challenging to be in that place. And it's not an easy place to be, but it's certainly a rewarding place if you can navigate it.
So we're nearing the end of the chat, but I want to squeeze another question in. This is another combined one from Aaron and Annalise at Park Forest. And they want to know, in South Africa, do you get to hang out with a lot of people, and do you understand what they're saying? And, you know,
Right.
sort of some of the cultural differences, because obviously there are different languages spoken
Yes,
there.
absolutely. So that's a really good question. And I mean, one of the reasons that it is easier to work in South Africa is that most people speak English, even some of the indigenous people. So it is easier to get around. I worked in Zambia for my master's. That was the bit from Montana to Zambia. And that was also because it was a former British colony. It had English as a base language. So I've been able to navigate with English primarily, but it makes me mad that I don't know more of the local language. And taking Spanish or taking Chinese or taking any of these other languages is really, really important, and you will go farther. I took French forever, and I took Russian, actually, for 4 years. And I can still read Cyrillic, which is kind of cool. But I haven't been able to use that in my research thus far. But just that cultural awareness of understanding different cultures and different languages is really important. So yes, I do work with people. I work with a lot of park rangers and managers of these ecosystems, but more broadly, other scientists, and of course, living there for 6 months, you get a broader community as well.
And actually, I remember when we came to your house, I heard your children speaking some of the language. It seemed like they picked up the language too. So I think it's good while you're young to also
a lot faster than I did.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was pretty impressed because some of the languages do involve the clicks that we've heard, and which is a little more difficult.
Yep.
So that is the end of our chat. That was the last question. We had many more questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. And this was our last chat for WiSciFiles. Thank you to everyone who's joined us for all of our chats and who joined us today. Again, a special thank you to the 5th graders at Park Forest Elementary School in State College, and to the 7th graders from Armstrong Middle School in Bristol Township. I hope that you guys will all share the videos and share what you've learned from these chats, and definitely give us feedback about things that you liked about it. This is something that we're hoping to be able to do more of in the future, even though this is the last chat of the season. So everything that we've done here is going to be posted at wpsu.org/WiSciFiles, so you can have access to it as much as you want to. Erica, thank you
thank
again
you,
for being here, and thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much. Great questions.